Give her a little bit of time in Louisiana and she loses her mind. Girls, absolutely. See, now, here's all you need to know. The human incident is happening right here, and her daughter's sitting all the way in the back. Just like... Oh, yeah. And then her husband sits away. See, they can't see this online. But yeah, her husband just kind of moves a little bit on. Actually, it does make me laugh. This lady's full of life. Too funny. Too funny. Okay. Let me see. Is Mark or Bob, are you back there anywhere close by? Okay. I came all the way up here and I didn't get my little laser pointer, which I'm going to need. It's in my office in the little plastic pull-out drawers next to my desk, like second drawer up. Second drawer up. It's a little black thing that says Kensington, little case. All right, thank you. Look at this guy. It's I'll put it up and down the aisles and see if anybody gets out and chases it like my cat. So that's what a little bit of playtime at church. Why not, right? Okay. A couple of things before we get started. We have a birthday that I'd like to make you aware of. So that's Jordana. She's sitting right here looking at her husband Harvey like, I'm going to kill you. Look at Jordana. Now, that was 15 years ago.
He looks better now.
Why would you say that, Greg? You're crazy. So, you always look great, Jordana. That's just... So the other thing that just so that you know, Harvey had sent me one of you as a child in a diaper, and he sends me this one today and says, "Yeah, let's show this one instead of that one." So there you go. Yeah. So there she is. So happy birthday! Is it? I didn't. It is this coming Saturday. Okay. So we'll probably have to show it again on Sunday just in case. Oh, that's right that's right, the Sweethearts Banquet.
We have the same birthday.
There you go. So yours is this Saturday too?
Yes.
Somebody make note of that so that we can have photographs of Greg. So, okay. We're going to look at a little bit of a rewind of last week because I want to show you the maps, but that's why I'm waiting for the laser pointer. So, did you guys find it? You're the man. Thank you. Needless to say, and I'm not even trying to be funny about this, but there have been some really, really, thank you. I've got those. Thank you. I remembered my glasses, so I'm 1 for 2. 500, man, that's like Hall of Fame numbers right there, if you think about it. Okay. So, needless to say, there have been some very, very interesting things happening in the last few days, if anybody hasn't noticed. So, that really kind of took this and made it a story that no one was talking about. Now, anytime that you begin to discuss the matter of Israel and whatever it comes to matters of land and the, quote, Palestinians and all of that stuff, and let me go ahead and stipulate to that really quick once again. When I say Palestinians, I use it just because it's the common, words that people use. It's the common description. Interestingly enough, in what we're looking at tonight, this plan discusses that. It's pretty funny. It flat out says the Palestinians have never, quote, had a land. It acknowledges that it's a group of people that have been kind of fabricated, and so it says that. But I'm going to refer to them as Palestinians because it's what this says, and then I'm also going to say the West Bank instead of Judea, Samaria, because that's what this says, and that's what most people understand, so that's what you're going to hear. So we're going to need at least tonight, probably even into next week, if this doesn't bore you, to get through this. But tonight has some really, really intriguing things in it. And I looked at a map, or not a map, I looked at a calendar, and just to kind of let you guys know, how many of you were not here Sunday morning? How many of you were not here last Sunday? Okay. then some of you may not have heard the announcement, but my wife and I will be moving, and we're going to be relocating to Texas to be with my kid and my grandkid and all that stuff. And depending on how fast everything goes, I may have maybe 3 Wednesdays before the end of the month, and then we'll have to see what happens in March. But also, I have already the website and everything is up and running, so I'll be able to continue all these. We're going to start with 1 Corinthians when I get there, and we'll be putting those up online so that you can still have the Bible studies here, and then on a different night I'll be putting them up on the website if you want to go through, and if you want to take the time for Bible studies between what Ed's doing here and the other people here and what I'll be doing in Texas. We'll have a lot of content out there. It's good to be in the Word, absolutely, and that's how we grow. So if you hadn't heard that news, I'll probably be ending the Wednesday nights on this topic because it's so important. So I'll also address that. Why is it important? Because really, when you stop to look at all of the passages that talk about when God finalizes everything as we know it of life here on the earth before the Lord returns, Israel is the focus of where all of that happens, and Jerusalem in particular. That's where it all happens. So whenever you see things taking place there, just remember that they couldn't have taken place except for midway through the last century. It wasn't even possible. They weren't even in the land, so there was nothing to be a problem for them. So when you take that into account, whenever something is happening in Israel, it's always important for us to take notice of what is happening there. Now, how many of you have been following carefully what's been going on, and how many of you have listened to various people talking about it and Bible teachers and everything and got their take on it? How many of you have done that since in this last week? Okay, so not many. Okay. It depends on where you're coming from. There are some people that think this is the worst thing that's ever happened. There are other people who think that it's absolutely terrific. And then there are those people that are kind of in between. And I guess you would put me in the kind of in-between category, not because I think anything will happen from it, but I'm glad that it actually identifies some of the real problems here. I don't think this has an ice cube's chance on the equator of happening. Not with this group of people, and not with our president and all the rest of that. Now, some people have even asked, well, what's this going to do to your trip to Israel? Nothing. So we're still going. That's not going to be a problem. If anything really was to break out, they would tell us. But, if you've noticed, since they've introduced this, it's been quiet over there. Haven't you noticed that? So the likely suspects are jumping up and down, and they're griping about how horrible it all is. So the Palestinian Authority and all the radical Muslim groups are losing their minds, which they always are. But in this case, there are some things about this one that are so different, and you'll see more of it. If you were here last week, you'll know I had said it this way. This is really very much like a business proposal more than anything else, and that's how it's written. When you read it and when you see it, when you hear the elements of it, you say, gosh, this sounds like a business plan. And so what I want to do is look through those maps really quick before we start, and then read some more of what is going into this. And I also want to point out something that you find people. Here's where there are a couple of verses that people really, really have their biggest problem with this. So let's deal with the maps first. Let's bring up the map of Israel, the 47 and the 68. You could just see they're kind of like maps just of the, okay, there we go. So there's the 47. Here's why that's so important. This one, along with the 67 maps, when after the war took place and then Israel gathered back up the land, here's what I want to point out to you when you see this. When you look at the division here of the two colors, this is what should have belonged to Israel. And then this is what was supposed to belong to the, quote, Palestinian state. This is what was expected. This is what was proposed in 1947. I want to draw particular attention to this here. And then notice Jerusalem was completely within, quote, Palestinian territory, right? So this is what was proposed. And then 1948 happens, and their War of Independence. And then they basically, because nobody on the Arab side wanted anything to do with this, and so 48 happens. In this is interesting, because let's go to the next one, the 67. Let's go to the one other than that, please. There's one other one that has a black writing out on the side. It's a nice high def one. It looks like a PowerPoint slide is what it looks like. Sorry? You're not able to find it? Really? It was on that, it was in the Israel, Okay. Some of you might even, well, we'll see if they're able to find it, but what you'll see in the 67 war is where you finally got Gaza and what they called the West Bank taken back. So in essence, what ended up happening after the 67 war, Israel took this part. There you go. There it is. This is what Israel took, but notice that little carve out right there. That's Jerusalem. So they were able to get Jerusalem back, and you notice they didn't use all of that. They just gave Gaza. They took Gaza, rather. Those were areas that were held by Jordan here and Egypt here. So when you overlay those two maps, it becomes really interesting when you see what's proposed by this plan that we're looking at. So let's look at the one that's proposed, and there's one after that that you flashed just a moment ago. It's kind of gray. Yeah, that one right there. Look at the blue parts of that. This is the proposal. So this is the proposed. Blue part would be the, quote, Palestinian state, and the rest of it would be Israel. It looks very similar. It's kind of a hybrid of the two maps. Do you see it? So this is a way of getting traffic between the two places because you have two states. That's what the proposal is. So what they're trying to bring about is a way to connect the Gaza area and then along the Egyptian border as it goes down that way. The blue little places there. And that's what this whole plan deals with in what they call Part B. It starts to go through the development of that. I'm reading from Part A of this agreement. Now, I'm going to ask you to turn to the book of Joel chapter 3, and I'm going to point out one thing of why this is such a contentious issue as far as the church is concerned, okay? And especially since it is us who is really kind of trying to push this and why people are very concerned within the church about this. And see if I can explain that. So, Joel chapter 2, let's have a word of prayer and we'll take a look at it. Father, we thank you again for your faithfulness to us and for how much of your word is dedicated to the topic that we're discussing tonight. We are able to see things happening here in the year 2020, but yet we saw that all of this was prophesied thousands of years ago, and we knew that this would be the case. So we ask, Lord, that you would give us understanding as we look at your word and that we would fully grasp and fully understand what it is that we read and how it relates to our world today. And we ask, God, that you would be glorified through the time here and that your word and your ability to tell things before they happen, that it would be seen in our eyes and understood, that you've told us these things before they happen, and we just look at the details. We give you all thanks and we give you praise in Jesus' name. Amen? All right, so as far as Joel is concerned, the reason why people are so gravely concerned about this, this is one of the passages that are there, but there are a couple of kind of interesting things to point out. Now, I'm going to ask you to bring one other map up, and it's the satellite image that's there, the satellite imagery. I'm going to sit off to the side here real quick while I do this. There's like a satellite picture that's there. I think it says, yeah. That we can leave that one up just in case you want to see this. Right now, there's so much of a question about the land. Now, if you look at the land that God had said to Abraham back in Genesis 15, that's the land that was promised to him. So it's the Nile to the Euphrates, and if you just snap a line between where they begin and end, that's what he had given to Abraham. So when you start hearing about division of land, if you've been here as we've gone through the end of the book of Numbers, you'll remember that when they came into the land this way here, two of the tribes settled right about in that area on the eastern side of the Jordan River. But God had given them the land and wanted them to occupy the land that was to the west of the Jordan. So what we would consider as modern Israel. The problem that people have with what we're doing is they feel that we are helping to divide the land. Now let's make sure that we understand something. The land is very much divided as it is right now. Anybody who's ever been there knows this as the case. You go from place to place, and you're going to see that there are places that are controlled absolutely by the Jewish authority, and other places where it's under the control of what they call the Palestinian Authority. And Gaza is a no man's land of terrorism. It's just crazy, but it's well down into the southwesternmost portion of the country. Now there is another satellite image that I have. Let's put that one up. Perfect. Okay. So here's the thing. You're going to find that as I read to you tonight, there are people that are saying it divides Jerusalem. Now, when you hear Jerusalem, just remember Jerusalem is a city with outskirts. So here's the part that's so important. This is the Temple Mount, okay? So that's the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the Dome of the Rock, and so you've got all that stuff here, and that would be the Mount of Olives. Where they're talking about the, quote, division is areas that really it's not very much Jewish activity there. Anyway, it's kind of given to the Palestinian Authority because it's in what is known as the West Bank. So there are two that are mentioned by name in this proposal, and that's Sufat right up here, and that would be, here's your orientation if you want to know. This is east, west, north, south, okay? We got that? So the areas that they're talking about of the division would be like this around Jerusalem, but they're not talking about dividing the old city, which would create such a problem. So when you hear people say that they want to divide Israel or Jerusalem, it's kind of what you see here in the text, but then when you start to see the division of Jerusalem, we're talking about the outskirts, and it's not the old city. In fact, they're talking about trying to build a place directly into the north above Safat, that place there, further up this way, where they're talking about building a big area for tourism, Muslim tourism, that is able to be kind of shuttled into Jerusalem for the holy sites. That's what's being talked about. So again, all of this is, it's just in the idea of, it's philosophic that they're trying to do it. But what you notice consistently when you read through this, it is trying to do something that has never been attempted, rather than just say you need to give them that part of the land and they'll take that part, which has always been the attempt. This time they're trying to say the carrot that will dangle in front of you is financial, and it is the prosperity of the people, and it's for their benefit. Now, Joel chapter 3. Here's why people become very, very concerned. That is the closest that we have of Jerusalem, correct? Okay. Is there any way to narrow down on the Temple Mount? Do you have the ability to zoom in on this at all? If you can, we don't have to do it right away. You can work on it. I have other things I can do. But if you can zoom in, there you go. Cool. Hadn't even thought about doing that, but thank you. All right, so here is this interesting passage, and here's one of the easiest to understand reasons why people are very concerned about what we're thinking of doing. Because as you've heard me say, the land is currently divided because Israel has allowed it. Okay? That's what they're doing. They feel that that's the land for peace. It's the way to stay in a place of peaceful relations with the Palestinians. What this does, this kind of more formalizes what is pretty much already in place, but it would basically be a way of saying, let's just make these borders, rather than you guys are here and we're here, let's formalize the borders and let's call it the state of Palestine. And then the Jews can have the state of Israel, and they'll share land, but they'll have their defined borders. That's what's being proposed here. And here's what makes people a little nervous and gives them acid reflux. Joel chapter 3, verse 1, "For behold, in those days and at that time, when I bring back the captives of Judah and Jerusalem." Now let's remember what happens when Joel writes this. there is still the idea of the complete dispersion of Jews from the land entirely. That happened at the hands of the Romans, okay? But as Joel would say this, they were still going to have the intrigues happen down in the south. There's the Babylonian captivity. They came back from that, and they were there during the time of the Grecians, and that was all taking place. And then in come the Romans. They were able to live there, but they were never completely dispersed. That really happened, and they quit being a kind of a state again, at the hand of the Romans in the first century. Until the 20th century, they never really had a home. God brings them back. That is a significant thing, and I don't care what anybody wants to try to say by trying to make the church spiritual Israel. That if you're going to try to make that case, you're just demonstrating your biblical illiteracy. So if they're back in the land, then this is giving you the understanding that they have to be in the land for the things of the day of the Lord, which is talked about in chapter 2. Peter quotes it at Pentecost, that falling of the Spirit upon the church and all of that took place. That was all, the work of the Spirit is all the way till the day of the Lord. That's what Peter tells you. And then here we come to chapter 3. For behold, in those days and at that time, when I bring back the captives of Judah and Jerusalem, very important, he says this, going forward into our times, I will also gather all nations and I will bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. Now, there's a lot of speculation. What is the valley of Jehoshaphat? No one can absolutely prove one way. You've seen a lot of people that are talking about what it could possibly be. Some people would say Armageddon, but Armageddon is well up into the north. So that's more in the area of Galilee. That's Mount Carmel. That's Nazareth. And then all the way down into Basra, into Jordan. That's where that is, well into the north. Now they talk about the Valley of Jehoshaphat. Maybe here's a couple of possibilities. This here would be called the Kidron Valley. And this over here is the Hinnom Valley, or the Valley of Gehenna. So those are two possibilities that they say, but those are tiny little valleys. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've ever been there, they are little ditches, basically. So the idea that you would have a big battle there, okay, but I'm telling you, it's a small valley. And if you're talking about it being in the Kidron Valley, when you're standing, if you want to get an idea of where we're talking about, if that's the Valley of Jehoshaphat that's being talked about, take a look when you leave here tonight. As you go out those doors, to your left, right next to the little usher's closet, you'll see a picture of that golden dome. And that's taken from about midway up on the Mount of Olives, and between you and the Temple Mount is the Kidron Valley. So if a battle's going to take place there, and he's bringing the nations there, that's going to be brutal, because it's hard to fit that many bodies there. And what's on either side of it? On the west slope of the Kidron Valley is a Muslim cemetery. On the eastern is a Jewish cemetery, and they're going to fight a battle there. That's what some people think. Could be the Kidron, and it could be also a valley that people have talked about that's close to Bethlehem. Now, if you've ever been there, Bethlehem's only a couple of hours or a couple of miles away. Jerusalem has valleys all around it. It's all kinds of hills and valleys and all that stuff. So this is only used here in Joel as the Valley of Jehoshaphat. So there's so much disagreement on it. But here's the thing that makes people really, really nervous. So he says, I will enter into judgment with them there on account of my people, my heritage, Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and they have divided up my land. So you see that God has a problem with a number of things. It was the treatment of his people, and so it was the idea that they had been dispersed, but then they had also divided up the land that God had given to them. And so whenever somebody starts to talk about the division of the land, the fear is anybody who's wanting to do that fears or is going to have the problem with the wrath of God. Now, there are a lot of people who have offended in this matter. We would be one who might offend in this matter if it comes to the division of the land. Or if we ever get to the place where we start to be treacherous in our dealings with Israel. And I believe in our last administration we did precisely that. This one, I am glad, is quite a bit better so far. But if God has a problem with the idea of trying to do a two-state solution, man, we are smack dab in the middle of it. How you like that? All right. to the plan. That's why we're all here, right? Okay, did I bring us all up to speed? Are we good now? Or are we just more confused than when we walked in? Again, here's me asking questions. Okay, so where we left off last week, listen to this, again, the language of this. Remember what they're trying to do is put the pieces together, and this is I don't know how else to say it, it's a business proposal that tries to deal with the political situation on the agreement itself. What's really interesting in this is that for the first time they actually are pretty good about determining and describing who is really the participants in this. So it says this: a peace agreement will be forged only when each side recognizes that it is better off with a peace agreement than without one, even one that requires difficult compromises. Peace between Israelis and Palestinians will lead to significant social and economic improvements. Notice that's the first thing that they say. It's always about social and economic. It's the well-being of the people, and that's why this one's different. If you ever want to try to figure out what's the biggest difference between this and everything else, it's we want you to be prosperous, and we want your life to be better. We want you to have more opportunity. We want you to live better. It's all that personal thing. Notice that this is saying this is good for you, the individual. That's what's been different here. Then there's stability and security for Israelis and Palestinians alike. There are those who benefit from the status quo. Accordingly, seek to prevent change that would benefit both parties. This is a way of starting this whole thing where he's going to say, that's your problem with the Palestinian Authority, all the way to being the PLO with Yasser Arafat. That guy would never do anything that would be good to make the problem go away, because then he doesn't have to be around, because there are no longer victims. That's pretty much what he's saying here, or what is being said here. Now, I believe what we're about to read next will be a great platform. I believe that this is the kind of thing that the Antichrist will use when he comes to power, of trying to broker something that has been so elusive for so long. Listen to this. Solving this conflict will not solve all the other conflicts in the region. However, resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will remove a pretext used to stoke emotion and justify radical behavior by bad actors, and have a positive impact that will increase stability, security, and prosperity in the region. This is directed at the elements of Hezbollah up in Lebanon, and the kind of Hamas supporting people in Syria, and then the Hezbollah supporting people that are in Iran, the terrorists, at all, as far as all of them are concerned. This is a way of calling them out, but not doing so by name. So their point is, if you want to get the other nations involved, it will help out the people in the land of Israel, but it'll also even further marginalize the other people who want nothing to do with peace, and they're the ones who are always stoking the problem. So they begin to identify those guys. That's why it's so interesting. Now, this part here, I believe, really shows a lack of understanding of the spiritual aspect of this, and I'll explain that. The role of the United States as facilitator in this process has been to collect ideas from around the world, compile them, and propose a detailed set of recommendations that can realistically and appropriately solve the conflict. So it is not just us, but it's like, let's bring all the best people together with no vested interest, allegedly. So this is like a bypassing of the UN, who have their agendas. But let's come up with real solutions. We'll put all the details together and we'll present it to you two parties. The role of the United States is also to work together with other well-meaning countries and organizations to assist the parties in reaching resolution to the conflict. But only the Israelis and Palestinians themselves can make the decision to forge lasting peace together. The final specific details of the Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement must be worked out directly between the parties. Now, they're trying to get the surrounding countries to put the pressure on the appropriate groups to make this happen. The way that they'll try to do that with Israel is, if you work on trying to do something like this and relax a little bit, we'll do business with you. Then the other people, the PLO or PA, if you want to call them, in Hamas, they're hoping that those same people will come to them and say, if you guys don't get it together, we're going to forcibly remove you. But that's going to require military and all the rest. You're going to see that in just a moment. A main fault line in the Middle East today is between leaders who want to create economic opportunity and a better life for the people and those who manipulate religion and ideology. Here is where a secular mind cannot grasp the problem. When you say ideology and religion, when it comes to Islam, that is the source of this problem, Islam is a religious ideology. They're not separate things. The ideology is this. It is one of domination, and it is one of conquest in the name of Allah. So any group like the Palestinian Authority or Hamas or anybody that's doing their political thing, they are doing it according to the ideological view that they have of domination, and it's wrapped in a religion. So trying to disconnect the two is not being honest with the problem. Either you know it or you're oblivious to the problem. So Islam is very simply a religious ideology. The ideology is domination and conquest and subjugation or death by the sword. And they use the religion to push that, and they also use it as a cover in order to not have governments interfere with them. Okay? So every time I say stuff like this, I just think, man, this stuff gets out on the internet. This is the kind of stuff that gets you shot. But it is, I can only be honest with what's the truth here. All right? So, this main fault line, the problem that people like to manipulate religion and ideology in order to foment conflict and excuse their failures. This vision aims to be respectful of ideology, religious beliefs, and historical claims. This is like the first time that anybody's want to say, well, who's been here first? They say it without saying it once again, because you're going to just have to look at this and say, so if we were to peel away everything else, who ends up running everything? Israel. They have the historic claim. Whenever we go there and I point out things, I'll point out stuff that's 3,000 and 4,000 years old and clearly Jewish, because there are synagogues and there are menorahs etched in their stone and all that stuff. That's before there was an Islam. So, this is really not complicated stuff, but nobody dares say it. So, they want this. The vision aims to be respectful of ideology, religious beliefs, and historical claims, but it is focused primarily on putting the interests and the aspirations of the people first. Arab countries in the region, listen to this, have been held hostage to this conflict, and they recognize its representatives sorry, I'm trying to move pages around. Arab countries in the region have been held hostage to this conflict and recognize that it represents an uncapped financial liability to them if it remains unsolved. Many Arab countries are ready to resolve Arab-Israeli conflict and want to partner with Israel and focus on serious issues facing the region. They offer no proof for that. The question is that wishful thinking, or do they really have people that are ready to sign on to this? Let me back up for just a moment and point out what should be the obvious thing here. The tribulation, by the time that for this to take place as I understand it, this is going to be something that the Antichrist will pull off. But the day of the Lord is 7 years, right? These types of things are ambitious time-wise. 3.5 years into that 7 years, the Antichrist comes out and becomes like a dictator. In world political things and something like this, let's remember, this has been conflict since 1947. And then the war in 48. What are we, 2020 now? Do the math. We're talking 72 years here. And they haven't been able to do it. Now we're talking about putting something like this in place and having it in place in 7 years. That was what it would take for it to be the day of the Lord, but only 3.5 for it to go from, hey, this guy is the Savior, to he's a dictator and killing people. Put that in your mind, because it happens here. It happens in this place. All right. While the Palestinians have never had a state, again, do you recognize what's being said there? Because they're saying Palestinians have been there forever. They've never had a state. It just says it straight out. They have legitimate desire to rule themselves and chart their own destiny. Any workable peace agreement must address the Palestinians' legitimate desire for self-determination. But you'll notice in here, no claim to the land. They're saying it without saying it. Now, this vision addresses these legitimate concerns, though, among other things, the designation of territory for future Palestinian state, strengthening Palestinian institutions of self-government, providing Palestinians with legal status, international standing of a state, ensured solid security agreements, and building an innovative network of roads, bridges, tunnels that enables freedom of movement for the Palestinians. This has never been proposed before, by the way, just so that you know. But what's so interesting about this, the idea of self-government, you realize what it'll take is getting rid. We're talking about clearing the deck of everything that has ever been, quote, Palestinian leadership. This means you have to get rid of the Palestinian Authority and you have to get rid of Hamas for this to even take place. Both of those two entities have already come out and said this is dead on arrival. Well, that was about as, you knew that was going to be the case. That was as predictable as getting wet if you fell out of a boat, assuming it was on the water. The vision aims to achieve mutual recognition of the state of Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people and the state of Palestine as the nation state of the Palestinian people, in each case with equal civil rights for all citizens within each state. Well, one already has that. The other one does not. And I always make sure I tell people on the trips, when we go through the Palestinian areas, snap your pictures and take them back home and show people what it's like for the poor people to have to live under the rule of the Palestinian Authority. If you look at the guy with the really palatial place there, he's connected. The people living in the shack don't, and they're right next door to one another. It's an amazing thing to see. And it wasn't something that I noticed the first trip. I noticed it the second trip. It was like looking at it and go, oh, I get it. It was interesting to see. And so I tell everybody, look, you're the ambassadors. You take the pictures and you go home and show people. Don't listen to CNN. Aims to achieve by search and rescue of buildings that had fallen and everything else, because they used to get bombed all the time. They're well trained and they were willing to go and help. They wouldn't let them in the country to help their own people. The vision aims to achieve by this recognition by the normalization with those countries that do not currently recognize the state of Palestine. So they're trying to do it both ways. Now, that would be us, by the way, because depending on who it is, in fact, President Trump cut off financial aid to them because they were using it for terrorist things. That's not Hamas. That's the Palestinian Authority that we're talking about. We cut off aid to them. Good. Good. Well, I'm sorry, it was to the second page. The state of Israel suffers, no government should be asked to compromise the safety and security of its citizens. This is especially true for the state of Israel, a country that since its establishment has faced and continues to face enemies that call for its annihilation. Israel has also had a bitter experience of withdrawing from territories that were used to launch attacks against it. Call it Gaza. Remember the reason why they pulled out of Gaza? What was that supposed to be? That was supposed to be land for peace, exactly. So they forcibly removed all the Jews who were there. No sooner did they leave than they bulldozed the synagogues and put up mosques. And that was an in-your-face thing. There isn't a single Jew that lives in Gaza. And they were moved out, and no sooner did they do that than who arrested control? Hamas. And they were supposed to be the duly elected representatives. No, they strong-armed it. And they just took over. And ever since, tens of thousands of rockets have come out of Gaza. Indiscriminately, they just land wherever they are. And there are some hardy people who live right in the middle of it. So you'll hear Ashdod, you'll hear Sderot, places like that. We get into it where you get to Beersheba. That's a place where if they got a really, really good one, it could get to where we are when we get to Beersheba. I don't worry about it because they have an underground cistern that you can get to and you're safe. You have enough time. When one flies out, man, you instantly get the alerts. Now, the state of Israel suffers from extraordinary geographic and geostrategic challenges. Simply put, the state of Israel has no margin for error. Yeah, because they are surrounded by varying degrees of hostile actors everywhere that you look. Now, here's the funny thing. When we go there, within a half of an hour of flying into Israel, you cannot get out of your seat. They tell you, go use the restroom, do whatever else, but for the remainder of the flight, you must stay seated. And the reason for that, very simply, is a jetliner, a big air, like a 747, those kind of things that we're taking in there. You can fly over from west to east at high speed. You can get through it in a matter of minutes at that speed because it's so small. So the last thing that they want to do is have somebody taking over. So if you're up and out of your seat and doing stuff 5 minutes, 10 minutes out, they know you have bad intentions or you're just dumb. So they're going to take appropriate measures. They don't mess around. But that is law. You cannot get out of your seat for these reasons. It's such a small place. So, this is especially true for the State of Israel, a country since its establishment. The State of Israel suffers from extraordinary geographic and geostrategic challenges. Simply put, the State of Israel has no margin for error. As dangerous as Gaza, run by Hamas, is to the State of Israel's safety, a similar regime controlling the West Bank would pose an existential threat to the State of Israel. I have never heard anybody willing to say that on our side by calling out the PLO. Or the Palestinian Authority. That is big, ladies and gentlemen. They're actually finally saying it. So is there any wonder why both groups hate this thing? They're finally being called out. It wasn't hard to put your finger on Hamas, but to call out the guys in the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas and those guys, that is really cool. So the question of territory, self-determination, and sovereignty. Any realistic peace proposal requires the State of Israel to make significant territorial compromises that will enable Palestinians to have a viable state. That's a big deal as well. Respect their dignity and address their legitimate national aspirations. Do you want me to bring the map back up of the proposed territory? Do you need to see it? Ask and you shall receive. There it is. Anything that's in blue is the state of, quote, Palestine. Okay? So this calls for that establishment. This is something that has never been so clearly defined. What they're trying to do, think about this, what you're looking at is the first time that somebody has said, let's draw the absolute borders of a state and let's show how we could build the infrastructure that attaches the two, and here's how we can bring industry to the area, here's how we get the surrounding countries to be involved with it, and then hopefully when all of that happens, it will weed out the bad actors because people will finally start to have some sniff of freedom and prosperity. That's the carrot that's being dangled. This is a big, I keep sounding like a broken record, but this is, I've never seen something like this before. Please don't mistake me for saying I'm in favor of it. I just think that this is the first time that you have something that is probably viable. And I think this is something that the Antichrist would love to have as a platform. This is breaking ground as I see it. I may be totally wrong, but I've never seen anything as ambitious as this and as detailed as this is. Again, it's a business proposal, not a political one. So, listen to this. Withdrawing from territory captured in a defensive war is a historical rarity. It must be recognized that the State of Israel has already withdrawn from at least 88% of the territory that it captured in 1967. Now that includes all the stuff that they had well into the Sinai, and that even includes, though they took the West Bank and control it, they allow a lot of the PA to operate and do their things. Like, up until just a couple of our trips ago, our tour guide would have to go sit in the back and just be one of us because he couldn't be in there as a guide in Bethlehem, like 2.5 miles from Israel, or from Jerusalem rather. So it's that divided already. The vision provides for transfer of sizable territory by the State of Israel, territory to which Israel has asserted valid legal and historical claims and which are part of an ancestral homeland to the Jewish people. You don't see that in reverse in this. They don't even say that about the Palestinians, but they do recognize Israel. And this must be considered as a significant concession. Let me translate that. any land that is given to the Palestinians is the ancestral home of the Jews, and it's a huge concession if they're willing to do it. Again, that enrages the Palestinian Authority kind of people and pretty much everyone else in the region. And this thing would basically say, you can be as mad as you want to, but if you don't want a piece of the action, that's on you. We're going to go ahead with this. Now, transportation corridors, included in this vision, they create transportation continuity that greatly reduces the need for checkpoints and greatly enhances the mobility and the quality of life and commerce for the Palestinian people. No more checkpoints. That is a really interesting thing, because what they're looking to do is, in this two-state thing, have it be so completely that is that state, this is this state, that there's no interaction unless they want it to be. Now, sovereignty is an amorphous concept that has evolved over time with growing interdependence. Each nation chooses to interact with other nations by entering into agreements that set parameters essential to each nation. Nobody ever talks like this, do they? So, it says the notion that sovereignty is a static and consistently defined term has been unnecessarily a stumbling block in past negotiations. This is just a way of saying, if we just keep using the same excuses, we'll get nowhere. Okay? The international community is struggling to find sufficient funds to address the needs of over 70 million refugees and displaced persons in the world today. In 2020 alone, the UN has asked for over $8.5 billion in new funding to help the millions of Syrian refugees and others around the world. Most of these refugees were expelled or fled from their homes in recent past, and they fared dire circumstances. Now it wants to address the people that have been displaced using the whole Syrian thing. Now, of course, what they don't say is what caused it. The Syrian thing was people trying to get away from ISIS. And also you had the ISIS bad guys intermingling with them so that they could get into places like Europe and those other countries. And they're creating havoc there. Now it's addressing all of that. Here's where they get to Jerusalem. Listen to this. The issue of Jerusalem's holy sites, particularly the Temple Mount, should be treated with the utmost of sensitivity. The state of Israel has been a good custodian of Jerusalem. During Israel's stewardship, it has kept Jerusalem open and secure. Jerusalem should be a city that unites people and should always remain open to worshipers of all religions. Now, it will not see that kind of, quote, peace until the millennium. That's just a nice little notion. Gaza has tremendous potential, but it is currently held hostage by Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and other terrorist organizations committed to Israel's destruction. The terrorist organizations running Gaza have not improved the lives of the people living there, and these groups have gained power and they've increased their activity. The suffering of the people of Gaza has only increased. The United States does not expect the state of Israel to negotiate with any Palestinian government that includes any members of Hamas, Palestinian, or of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, or its surrogates, unless that Palestinian government, including its members of Hamas and Islamic Jihad, they have to explicitly commit to nonviolence, recognize the state of Israel, and fully satisfy the other Gaza criteria set forth in Section 9. Section 9 is further on in this document, and it is all about Gaza only. But notice what it is here. This allows Israel to say, we won't even sit at the table until those guys, one of two things. Either Hamas leaves, or Hamas has to absolutely change its charter. How many of you have ever taken the time to read the charter of either Hamas or the PLO, now the PA? Anybody ever done that? I'm the only one in this room who's done that. That tells you how weird I am. Both documents call for the elimination of Israel. The PLO, now the PA, wants to do it by their resistance type of thing. Hamas just flat out says by eradication. How are you going to get those guys to come to grips with that? So, should negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians result in a peace agreement, the state of Israel, listen to this, will be expected to implement its obligations under the peace agreement only if the Palestinian Authority or another body that is acceptable to Israel has full control of Gaza. Terrorist organizations in Gaza are disarmed and Gaza is fully demilitarized. Right now, nobody goes into that place unless it is war. If you guys remember in the last couple of years when they were burning the tires on the border and all that stuff, and they were building tunnels, and they were actually making their way into Israel, they had IDF uniforms. Remember when all that stuff was going on? What they're talking about doing here is taking over Gaza and eliminating Hamas and propping up at Israel's acceptance whoever is going to be the government in Gaza if Hamas doesn't come to the table. These are guys who are dedicated to die for the case of Allah. That is going to require war to happen, for it to happen. For comprehensive peace to be achieved, it is up to the Palestinian people to make clear that they reject the ideologies of destruction, terror, and conflict, and unite for a better future for the Palestinians. See, here's why, one of the reasons why people get all freaked out and they say Jared Kushner is the Antichrist, or maybe even Trump. All right. If our president or any of his people went there right now and tried to go and have talks with Hamas, if they came out with their lives, it would be interesting. This would go absolutely nowhere. It will take a totally demonically possessed human being with supernatural ability to manipulate people in order to bring this about. Okay? If this is what it looks like, in order to make this happen, if anything ever happens like this before the Lord returns or at that time, see again, the Antichrist is able to start his whole thing here by bringing peace to it. We looked at that in Daniel, so 9:27. That whole peace compact, whatever that is, that brings everyone to the table, ends up becoming a worldwide thing. So somehow they've got to work this out. Now we might think, well, Gaza's a long way from Jerusalem. Not really. If you're in a car and you know how to drive and know the roads and everything else, Gaza to Jerusalem's an hour. It's not a big deal. Less than that, depending on how you drive. It's close. Everything there is close. All right. This is in section 3. The conflict has grown old. The arguments have become worn, and the parties have failed to achieve peace. At this point, only a comprehensive answer to the critical issues has the potential to galvanize the parties to end this seemingly intractable conflict. Both parties must make significant and difficult compromises to achieve greater gains. By comprehensive, we hear that all the time. That just means bureaucracy, but it means complete. It means the whole package. This is the whole package, by the way. Then in section 4, this is borders. This is what they're proposing would happen. If you do borders, it's going to enhance mobility for both Israelis and Palestinians within their states. It provides pragmatic transportation solutions to address the needs of the Israeli and Palestinian enclaves that are described below. The enclaves are like what sometimes you hear settlements. How is it that if they're in one another's territory, they're wanting to be able to connect them through roads, bridges, tunnels, all the rest of that stuff? They want to not just divide it up. They want to make it where you get from place to place within all of that. That's what's, again, it's just amazing what they're thinking of doing. It enhances the commercial viability and economic independence of the state of Palestine. It provides for a potential significant expansion of Gaza to enhance its development. Remember that whole thing along the Egyptian border? Remember all those little places there? That's what's being spoken of here. The state of Israel and the United States do not believe the state of Israel is legally bound to provide the Palestinians with 100% of the pre-67 territory. Did you hear that? There are some within the Palestinian Authority that said, if you don't give us all of the West Bank back, we're not even talking with you. That's the pre-67 borders, which would include the Golan Heights. Right? So what's happened since Trump became president? He's actually said, hey, look, the Golan Heights belongs to Israel. And they put some place up there, they named it after Trump up in the Golan Heights. So, just, it's a funny thing. This vision is a fair compromise, and it contemplates a Palestinian state that encompasses territory reasonably comparable to the size of the territory in the West Bank pre-67. So it's basically saying, we'll give you back what you lost, just not the way that you had it before. But you'll get the same amount of land ultimately. So again, the dangling of the carrot. Moreover, until such time as the state of Palestine may develop its own port, as described below, the state of Palestine will benefit from special access to certain designated facilities at the state of Israel Haifa and Ashdod ports. Those are just two of the main ports that they have in Israel. One's well up into the north and the other one's kind of middle of the country. But this does not allow them to bring things into the Gaza port from the Mediterranean. Because if you remember, they've tried to do that before. And that was where the IDF boarded that boat that was trying to run the gauntlet. Remember all that stuff that happened? And there was a big incident there, and they found all kinds of things on that boat. Well, they're going to let them use the ports, and then they'll be able to get goods and everything, but then Israel can keep an eye on it. It says the state of Israel will benefit from having secure and recognized borders. It will it will not have to uproot any settlements. That's, again, big deal. And it will incorporate the vast majority of Israeli settlements into contiguous Israeli territory. Israeli enclaves located inside of the Palestinian territory will become part of the state of Israel and connect it through effective transportation systems. That'll work both ways. And that is what you see there. See how divided up it is? Look at where you'll see little colors scattered like that. You see all those little things? That's not the way that the West Bank is right now. It recognizes what is already happening. And again, this is kind of an unprecedented thing. They're talking about dividing it up the way that it is as we speak right now. So again, it's very unusual. Approximately 97% of Israelis in the West Bank will be incorporated into the Israeli territory, and approximately 97% of Palestinians in the West Bank will incorporate into the Palestinian territory. Land swaps will provide the state of Palestine with land reasonably comparable to what they had pre-67. The Palestinian population located in their enclaves or their settlements that remain inside of Israeli territory but not part of the Palestinian state will become citizens of Palestine if they want. They'll have the option. You'll be able to be an Israeli citizen or a citizen of the nation of Palestine. That's what's being proposed here. So again, when you look at this, you just go, it just doesn't seem like it's possible. It doesn't seem like this could ever really take place. But somehow, some way, in the not too distant future, somebody's going to be able to get the sides to look at this seriously. It'll be interesting to see what happens probably in the next year to 18 months, especially depending on what happens in November with the election and everything else, where this goes. So for tonight, we've probably gone about as far as we want to. Let me do the last couple of these things and we'll finish up for tonight. For over a decade, Gaza has been ruled by Hamas, a terrorist organization responsible for the murder and the maiming of thousands of Israelis. Rather than dedicate themselves to improving the lives of the people of Gaza, Hamas and Islamic Jihad and other organizations have dedicated to the destruction of Israel. At the same time, they have brutally repressed the Palestinians and diverted hundreds of millions of dollars meant to improve the lives of those people by fueling a war machine of thousands of rockets and missiles, dozens of terror tunnels, and other lethal capabilities. So again, I've never heard our government talk like this before. Everybody knows it, but they've never had the courage to say it. This is identifying them. As a result, Hamas's terror and misrule, the people of Gaza suffer from massive unemployment, widespread poverty, drastic shortages of electricity and potable water, and other problems that threaten to precipitate a wholesale humanitarian crisis. This vision is designed to give the Palestinians in Gaza a prosperous future. This is, I'm hoping you get a chance to see here, this is saying, if you want it to stay the same way that it is, it'll continue on that way. If you, the people who live there, want something different, this is really calling them to revolt. Now, whether they'll be able to see it or not is it's hard to say. This vision is designed to give Palestinians in Gaza a prosperous future, and it provides for the possibility of allocating the Palestinian-Israeli territory close to Gaza. And it's shown in that map, within which infrastructure may be rapidly built to access Gaza's pressing humanitarian needs, and it'll eventually enable the building of a thriving series of cities and towns that will help the people flourish. Significant improvements for the people of Gaza will not occur until the ceasefire with Israel. There is a ceasefire with Israel and a demilitarization of Gaza. the governance structure that allows the international community to safely and comfortably put new money into investments and will not be destroyed by predictable future conflicts. That's what's so interesting, is because in order to demilitarize it, you've got to get rid of the bad actors, but that means you're going to have to get access into the place. And any time that Israel's gone in, it's been a really horrible, it's guerrilla warfare is basically what it is. So, with that being said, the state of Israel will retain sovereignty over territorial waters, which are vital to Israel's security, and it provides stability to the region. So, this last thing. The United States recognizes the heightened sensitivity surrounding Jerusalem, a city that means so much to so many people. This, we'll have to pick up this next week. This is where the cup of trembling of Zechariah 12 comes in. It is an amazing thing when you stop to realize how one city, how many of you have been there? Okay. With the people who've raised their hands, any of you in here who are interested, ask them how big Jerusalem is. It is so small. The big part of it. Now, Greater Jerusalem is a lot larger than you saw in that satellite picture. You didn't even know that that stuff was considered Jerusalem, because you just think Temple Mount and the old city and the walls, and then some of the structure that's there over by the Knesset and the museums and all that stuff. But still, if I'm trying to think of it in terms of how big it is, how many of you guys know how big Buena Park is when you get up into like Malvern and Beach and all that stuff? Do you guys know that that's still Buena Park? When you think of everything between here and there and all of that, Jerusalem. And the world's losing its stuff over that little place. Which helps you to understand that what we are talking about is a spiritual matter. There's no explanation for why it should be such a contentious thing. There's no good reason. None whatsoever. Unless it is something that it means so much to God, therefore it means so much to Satan, and it stirs up people. There's a spiritual dynamic to this. And it's why, no matter how interesting it is, men's solutions will not fix the problem. But it will take someone with a real supernatural ability to implement what I think is going to look very much like that. Because you have to be able to bring the two sides together to make it seem like you're a man of peace. Because it brings peace, remember? That's what happens initially before it becomes a dictatorship and he becomes a tyrant. And it happens in short order. When this is all said and done, this may be like every other one that fizzles out. And I've seen more of these things and read through more proposals and bits and pieces of stuff over the years than I care to remember. And they all sound the same. This one sounds way different to me. Way, way different. So I thought I would present it to you. We've got one more week to do this, and possibly one after that. Are you guys getting bored with this? Okay. If there's still an appetite for it and you want to keep seeing these things, I can do it until we get through it. I won't get into part B because it involves math. Okay? Book of Numbers is all the math I want to do. And it's not even about math. So this stuff is very intriguing to me, and I hope it is to you as well. So let's stand and let's have a closing word of prayer. Father, we thank you once again that you have told us so much about what it will be happening in the future. We ask, Lord, that as we gather together next week and as we look at what Zechariah has to say, this idea that this little place in this little part of the world will have so much to do, and all of mankind and the end of things as we know them all happens in this one little place. Lord, we pray that we would have our eyes open as to how and why would that happen, that we might be able to see that it is because it is your land and it is the place where you have had your name known, and so therefore it becomes a big deal. We ask, Lord, that you would help us in our understanding as we study through these things, and that we would be looking up because our redemption draws nigh. We thank you. We give you all praise in Jesus' name.